We were out just about having fun with the team, and we decided to take a group picture, and they took a picture and then they sent it to us later that night. And they sent this picture, and I'm scanning the picture, and Amy, I could not find myself. I couldn't find myself, but I kept seeing this person standing off to the side where I should have been. But as I looked at that person, I was like, that's not me.
Dr. Cory Christensen is a doctor of physical therapy with over a decade of experience in outpatient orthopedics and sports rehabilitation. But beyond his clinical background, Cory is also the founder of The Inner Shift, a transformational platform that helps people rewrite the subconscious stories that shape their lives, using a powerful blend of neuroscience, mindset work, and emotional integration. What sets Cory apart is his ability to bridge the mind and the body, helping people understand that healing and transformation begin not just with physical recovery, but with the beliefs we carry underneath. He's also a proud father of two who he credits as both his greatest source of joy and a powerful influence in his own personal growth and purpose. Today we have Dr. Cory with us. Cory, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Like you said, my name is Dr. Cory Christensen. I am a doctor of physical therapy, and I specialize in outpatient orthopedics and sports medicine and rehabilitation. And I've been doing this for over just about 12 years, and it's been a phenomenal profession to be involved in. And I actually work with people from all ages and all different demographics. And being able to do that has helped me see a wide variety of like the human nature and kind of how people respond to physical pain, setbacks, whether it's chronic, acute. And what I've been able to see over the course of my career is that people aren't just limited by physical issues when they come to see me. They come to see me primarily because they have a bad shoulder or a problem with their back, or they want to get back to doing sports. But more than not, people tend to be limited by the stories they tell themselves about the injury or about the pain that they're experiencing and what it means for their life, whether they're going to be able to return to playing sports, whether they're going to be able to go back to work, playing with their kids. They integrate a story about their pain, and that story is what controls the whole process of their rehab. And it's unique because as a therapist, if I can understand their belief system about what's going on with their pain, about what's going on with their situation, and we can address the story or the belief of what's happening, then we're going to be seeing a lot more progression. We see breakthroughs that people haven't been able to have before. And this is kind of where my presence to the community on Twitter, on online has been, because I've been approached by past patients who have been like, when I worked with you, not only did I get my shoulder back where I was able to return to sports, my life felt like it was in order. Like I felt like I had direction, I had drive, I had purpose. And you need to share this with people about what stories or beliefs can do to the human body, to your reality, to a physical nature, or whatever you want to see in your life.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Why do you think it is? Like, from a non-scientific, like a street person, why do you think it is that the thoughts that we think about ourselves, about our injuries, about our body, why do you think those things limit us?
Because we want to have a sense of we want to have a sense of why something is happening. Being able to say, well, this happened, so therefore A, B, and C is going to happen to me. It gives us a sense of control. And it gives us a sense of okay, well, if I had an accident, this happened to me. I had no control over it, so therefore I can be a victim. And so and honestly, I'd say the mentality or the way people want to think and act is that they want to default to a victim mindset, because being responsible or taking charge for something that happened, whether it's favorable or unfavorable, is hard. They perceive it to be hard. So that's why the outside of it, we create these relative stories, we create these thoughts to give us a sense of well, I can be the victim, I don't have to take responsibility, and there's my new story. We want to have a reason for why.
Right. So that victim mentality is a big deal. I know you know people who walk around with that victim mentality. I know people who walk around with it. And I think you're right. It's instead of taking accountability or personal responsibility for things that happen in our life, not only injuries like the people you're dealing with, it's the physical side, but any part of life, whether it be career, relationships, personal life, any part of our lives, it's a lot easier to blame somebody else than to take accountability for the decisions that you've made to get you where you are today. And so that's where I think a lot of that victim mindset comes in. But what's interesting to me is that you take the actual healing of the human body, the physical body, through what you do professionally, and you relate that to how the mind works and the neuroscience behind it. So can you tell me a little bit about maybe how you moved into that area?
It goes back to the very beginning of my career, is where I would see people come up with the same response, or there was a very common theme that I'd heard is well, this is the way that I am, and therefore I cannot do such and such activity. And as a therapist, and when they teach you in school, they teach you about how to help the body, how to do different techniques and exercises. But I was quickly noticing this wasn't anything physical that I was able to address. I had to go deeper into it. I had to get to their basically their core belief of what was happening, and try to unweave those basically lies or misperceptions that they're telling themselves about why they couldn't do that. And once I started to challenge that notion, I was starting to see bigger breakthroughs.
How many other therapists do you think are using the same technique or the same strategy in their practices? Do you think many are?
Unfortunately, not. In my organization, this is a common concept that we teach. We go through about how we can get to the root of somebody's problem, what's really going on, but also finding that emotional connection to what's happening and addressing those beliefs right there. Because there is a lot of research out there that will say the person's belief about therapy, whether they believe therapy is going to help them, dramatically increases the results that you can get within the clinic.
I guess my question is, I wonder why other therapists aren't using the same approach. I mean, we know that the mind is powerful, and then everything starts with a thought. So it's thought leads to actions, all of that stuff. The words you say, the things you do. Well, it just makes sense that what you think would absolutely have an impact on the healing of the body. Um, so yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And so I just wonder why other people aren't doing this, and maybe why it's not even taught in med school. But this might throw you a curveball, but I am curious if maybe you already have, but what would you call this type of therapy if you had to give it a name?
Holistic therapy. Yeah, we're talking about mind, body, and spirit. We're talking about the whole self. We got to understand is when somebody comes in, they're not just a person who has shoulder pain. They might be Tim, who has 5 kids, who loves to play football, who can't throw the football anymore, and it's also affecting his job, his sense of being able to provide. And so that is getting down to seeing the person as they are, knowing who they are, what's important to them, and the story that they're telling themselves about what's happening. So it is very much a holistic approach versus just a physical model approach.
Is there a specific limiting belief or story that you see people repeat most often when it comes to this? And if so, what tends to help them get past that or unlock it?
Yeah, the most frequent limiting belief that I see is like, well, this is who I am. They believe that, especially with somebody who has chronic pain. Let me take this for people who have chronic pain. Somebody who's been suffering for 5, 6, 7 years. They've basically adapted this notion that this pain is now just part of them and they just have to live with it. And I immediately will stop them right there and say, do you want to live with this forever? And that causes a shift in their mentalities. Like, well, maybe I don't want this to live with me forever. So why do we say that this is who you are and this is just something you're going to have to live with? And so the fastest way to get to help them start to see the distinction between what they think is going on versus the reality is you challenge their thoughts, their statements right there, and you start to create a contrast about who they are in the moment versus who they want to be. I'll say, if this pain was no longer here, who would you be? And then they start, well, I would be out climbing, hiking, camping. I'd be back to work. I'd be doing all these things. And like, so let's focus on that and let's create a reality based around that through the thoughts that we're telling ourselves, the ideas that we can have, belief that you can achieve that. And let's focus from there and start to move forward. And you can, in the room, you can feel in the moment when they have that little moment of like belief that maybe their life could be better, how much lighter, like physically lighter the room becomes and how much more energy they start to express in their face. I mean, it's actually really like addicting for me to see that moment where they're like, oh, maybe there is a different option and now we can start the process.
I work with people a lot with their beliefs about themselves too, not on the physical side, but more on the emotional side and relationships and things like that. And I completely agree with you about when you can see it in their entire demeanor, their face, their expression. And like you
Yeah.
said, the energy that they're putting up, it completely changes. There's a dramatic shift and a moment in time when that happens, and it's night and day. I agree. So how long does it usually take? I mean, I know everybody's different, but for a typical patient, how long does it usually take to get somebody from when they walk in and they feel like they're going to have to live with this chronic pain forever? And look, let me just give a disclaimer. There probably are for sure people who have chronic pain from um, vertebrae issues, discs, things like that, right? But when we're talking about the people who have the ability to overcome that pain through the help of their mind, how long does it take those people to get from the moment when they walk into your office to get to somewhere where they feel like, hey, I can do something different or believe something different to impact my
Yeah.
situation?
Like, how fast can that seed of belief take root to where it actually starts to bear fruit? I'll tell you this, it can happen in the very same session. I've seen it too many times. That it depends on the person's the want that they have, and how deeply rooted that belief is. But if I do my job correctly, like the first thing that I want to have happen when I am meeting them with them for the first time is, one, I want to know what it is they're thinking and feeling. And two, I want to get them to trust me. We can change things. And in that very first session, if I can get them to believe that, hey, this is going to work, I've had people walk out of the room being like, I already feel better and you didn't even do anything. It was like this because now we are experiencing the hope. There is so much evidence all around us about how strongly those stories or that mental anguish that people can have can create physical limitations and physical pain. And so you can have dramatic responses like that, dramatic changes. I've seen it a lot. And you have ones that take a little bit longer because they're afraid. They're afraid of giving themselves permission to believe. You know.
Yeah, so it's fascinating to me how much the body and the mind are connected. The stress levels when we're carrying heavy things. There's an activity I give in a lot of the workshops that I do, and I give them a bag, like a tool bag, a little DeWalt tool bag full of landscaping rocks. And I have somebody walk around with that bag, and we talk about how heavy it is and how if they were to carry that around all day, like especially like I say, okay, put it in your right hand or whatever, left, whatever hand you're going to put it in. But if you were to carry that bag around all day and not set it down, do you think it would impact your conversations? Do you think it would impact the way you felt? Do you think it would impact your mindset or your ability to be creative or innovative or to remain calm and rational, right? How much would it impact your relationships? And every single time, just that physical holding of that bag of rocks and connecting it to the way it would, they all admit, yeah, if I had to carry this around all day, I'd probably be a grouch, a bear, snapping at people and I would be in pain. Well, that to me is absolutely a metaphor to the things that we hold inside of ourselves emotionally. And yeah, it's going to manifest itself in the physical body. But when you talk about the science, can you walk us through why our brains seek to prove us right and how that happens?
Absolutely. And this is something I really enjoy talking to people about because it's their mind just gets opened and they can start to see how these processes work. So first of all, we got to distinguish our brain from two different things. Our conscious mind versus our subconscious mind, right? And so our conscious mind, it's the mind that we use to make deliberate decisions. Like, hey, I want to have a Pepsi or a Dr. Pepper. Let me go get that Dr. Pepper, which is great, and drink it, right? It's the one that we make those daily decisions with versus our subconscious mind, which is always just running kind of in the background. Now, if we look at the processing power of those two minds, our conscious mind is able to process between 40 to 50 bits of information per second.
Okay. That's a
People will
lot.
say, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff that's happening per second. But what we realize that our subconscious mind is processing at about 11 million bits per second. So that is a
Wow.
huge dramatic difference between what's going on consciously and what's going on subconsciously. So one of my mentors who's helped me understand this better says, well, imagine that you have 40 to 50 employees who are very deliberate and who are only working when you say, I want you to do this. They execute said order and then they stop. That's your conscious mind where you have those things happening, but it's only active when you're actually thinking about doing said activity. Now, your subconscious mind is the equivalent of 11 million workers who are working 24/7 and who are just ramming information and going through your brain. And you know what? As good as employees that they don't always hear you clearly. So when we say, "Hey, I don't want to eat junk food," they hear, "Okay, eat junk food," right? Or, "Hey, exercise is hard," and they say, "Okay, exercise is hard." Their only job is to help prove you right. Like they're the ones that say, "You know it. Whatever you say, we believe. We won't question it. We won't doubt it." But they tend at times they kind of get those orders mixed up. They don't always hear it as clearly. But when it comes to a negative emotion or a clear, deliberate, positive emotion, we can process that or we can channel that down to our subconscious mind to help start getting that vision or those bits to kind of fall in place.
So I call those pieces, I call them soldiers. And I might have told you this before when we spoke, but it's like those soldiers are going to follow whatever command you give them. So if you're going to tell them, hey, I'm so excited to go do this podcast or to do this show or to speak at this event or whatever the case might be, then the soldiers in your brain are like, oh, she's excited. Man, let's go. And they come out and they give it their best. But if you tell them you're scared, so I do this in the context of how fear and excitement are related in the brain, and you just have to be the one to give them that command. But if you say, oh my gosh, I'm so scared, I'm nervous, I'm going to mess up. Well, the soldiers in your brain are like, hey, I don't know what's going on here, but we got to protect her. And they're going to keep me from being able to give my best performance because they're trying to protect me.
And so what you said there is a huge thing because they say, hey, I don't want to mess up. That subconscious mind, like I said, it doesn't always hear you clearly. It's going out because when we say that, I don't want to mess up, what tends to happen? We end up messing up, we end up doing that. We're like, I didn't want that. And the subconscious says, well, you said to mess up. So you messed up, right? It was the command. It kind of that signal gets mixed, but
they don't interpret the word no. When you say something, you said earlier, like, I don't want to eat junk food, it hears eat junk food. It doesn't hear that don't want to. It hears eat junk food. So that's what it focuses on. And I think that's why you hear a lot of times people say to focus on the positive. So instead of saying, I don't want to eat junk food, instead you could say something like, hey, I want to eat whole foods, raw cooked vegetables, fruit, lean meat, whatever your diet looks like, but focusing on the things that you do want instead of the things you don't want, right?
when you focus on something that you do want versus something you don't want, you're actually stimulating another part of your brain called the reticular activating system. And people hear about that often. They're like, well, what is it? It is the literal filter for your brain, right? Because you were saying we got 11 million bits of information per second coming in. Well, that filter has to distinguish between what we want to come up into our brain, what needs to come up to brain, what versus what doesn't. And so when you focus on something, that is where you set your settings for your filter. Hey, focus on this. And so that part of the brain activates and starts telling your subconscious mind, Amy or Cory, they want this. And so that starts to generate and bring that stimulus from the outside world and brings it into your focus. And so you see more of it,
So that's why, like, if you buy a new car, you never notice that car before driving down the road, but all of a sudden you have it and you see them everywhere, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like so I like to play this game when I go on road trips. And so I had this one just coming back from a road trip this weekend, and before I left, I sat down and I said, what kind of car have I not seen or like what I want to see today? And I just felt the emotion kind of programming that or the reticular activating system and sending that subconscious message, hey, Cory wants to have this truck. And we got in the car and started to drive. Now, on the way home, it was incredible. I think I saw over 70 to 80 different styles of that specific truck. That one specific truck that I had formed in my brain on the way home.
How far was that drive home?
It was about 2 hours.
Okay, okay. But still, that's a lot.
That's a lot, but the thing is if I hadn't even thought about that truck, right? Because there's probably more, because there's times I'm talking with the kids, my attention's not like analyzing the cars. If I had not sent that signal up to my brain, would I have ever even noticed those? No, those cars were still there, but I was drawing my attention out of that. I was specifically trying to hone in on that thing. So for ourselves, we say focus on the positive, like such and such activity or injury happened to you. Well, let's start to say, well, this is happening for you. What can you start to learn about yourself that you want to change now? And how can we program that belief as we're going through the shoulder rehab? How can we change those other beliefs about what's going on in your life at the same time? And so when you focus on positivity, your brain starts to filter positivity. And that starts the feedback loop of your thoughts, your emotions, and those beliefs, which are the driving force between the subconscious, what you're thinking about what you're seeing in your reality.
You were talking about how you first got into this aspect of therapy beyond just the physical therapy or occupational therapy, right? And you said you tested it on yourself. Can you share with us what you did, how you tested it, and why?
Well, yeah, because if I'm going to tell somebody to exercise, right, being a therapist, I have to know like what exercise is going to do, why we have to do it, and what the accomplishing tasks are going to be behind it. Now, if I'm going to challenge their mindset too, I got to know what I'm talking about. I have to be able to say this. I've done this myself, and I've pushed past my limits. So when I first came out as a new therapist, I remember I was standing, being introduced into the whole company. There's the CEO was standing right next to me. He was giving me a tour of the clinic, and he said out loud to everybody, he said, "Everybody, I want you to meet Dr. Cory. This guy is going to be an all-star here." And I was just like, oh my gosh, I felt so put on the spot because I'm a new therapist just graduating, and everybody's like clapping and cheering. And he's like, I'm not even kidding you. This guy's going to be an all-star. And at that moment, I was like, do I feel like an all-star? And it was a clear no. I don't feel like an all-star. I'm just starting out. But it was that moment where I started looking as, okay, I got to learn the basics, learn how to treat somebody, go through the process. But once I got familiar with like the operations of being a therapist, then that's when I started to challenge the belief that I was an all-star. And it took me a while to get to that because I wanted to impress, or not impress, I would say, to make them so proud of me and to make that a reality, that I was actually doing it out of a false sense of security. I was actually focusing in on my faults of why I wasn't an all-star versus why I was becoming an all-star. And the more that I tried to not fail, the more I failed. And I remember one time it was about a month later, I was in his office, the CEO's office, and I said, I feel like I'm failing. And he says, well, why? And I said, because I don't want this and this and this to happen. He's like, you're focusing on what you don't want to have happen. Well, what are you focusing on, the things that you need to do to become that all-star? Like, be the all-star already. Like, just know that you are. And then those actions, those processes will naturally come to you because you're already developed that persona, that mindset that you are an all-star.
How long after he told you that did you start to change how you thought about yourself?
Immediately, I walked out of that office and said, you know what? I'm not going to default back into that mode. And it was dramatic, the change that I had in not only my capacity to help people get better, but how the success rate that I was having with my patients healing, the amount of joy that I had in my life, like just feeling overall like I was going to work and loving it versus being like, oh, I got to prove myself again today.
That's what we call the shift, right? So that conversation with your boss and the way he explained your mindset to you, would you say that was one of the big shifts in your life?
That was definitely a big shift in my life as far as how to be a therapist. Now, the biggest shift in my own life came back in around 2018, where the process of being a therapist had been a lot better. I was running a clinic, I was overseeing a few other clinics, mentoring a lot of people within the organization as well. But outside of my work, my personal life was struggling. I was having difficulties at home, relationship that wasn't very healthy, I would say, toxic, and I was losing myself. And my coping mechanism was I turned to food. I turned to a lot of food, and I ate a lot. I didn't realize what was happening to me, and people would start to talk to me here and there, and they're like, "You seem different. Like you're different. You're different. What's going on? Are you okay? Like where are you going? And I thought people were crazy. But we went on a company vacation. They took us all to Seattle, and we were out just about having fun with the team, and we decided to take a group picture, and they took a picture and then they sent it to us later that night. And I'm sitting there in my hotel room, and they send this picture, and I'm scanning the picture, and Amy, I could not find myself. I couldn't find myself, and but I kept seeing this person standing off to the side where I should have been. But as I looked at that person, I was like, that's not me. Like, I could physically, like, my mind was saying, well, that's you. But like, here in my heart, I was like, no, that's not who I am. I had, at that point, I was able to realize that I had lost myself completely. I broke down crying in that moment. I completely lost it, because I knew at that moment that, it's like, if I was to continue to go down that same path, things were going to get a lot worse. And so, when they get to that point, they can feel guilt, they can feel pain, they can feel whatever. But the number one thing that came to my mind is like, my kids need me, you know,
Yeah.
and I love my kids, and so it was more than just like, well, I got to start eating healthy, I got to start exercising more, I got to start living better. It was just complete transformation, like somebody replaced my inner core, pulled it out and put it back in, and my whole self just became energized. And it wasn't even a hard decision at that moment. Like, from that moment on, like, I was like, junk food was out of the question, exercising was ritual, and it was, and the amount of change that I saw over a short period of time was dramatic. And each day people started coming and saying, you're what are you doing? You're like, you have more light, you have more energy. And well, that shift happened to me very personally 2018, and that's where I really started this whole process. Being, feeling, thinking is so intertwined, that where I fully committed myself to understanding this whole loop.
That's fantastic that, it took it's a shame that it took something like that, but it's also great that you were able to take that snapshot in time and say, "You know what? It ends today." I mean, there've been a couple of times in my life, I will say one from the physical side. I did a talk in California last year that was videoed, and had a speaker reel made of me from that video, and I saw it and I was like, oh heck no. I have not gotten to that point in my life, and I took drastic action. Same thing, right? It happened to me. The first time that ever happened was in 2003 when my brother got married and they got their wedding pictures back, and I did the same thing you said you did. I was scanning like, where am I? Like, I don't even see me. I know I was a bridesmaid. Where am I? Right. Um, but you know, that's the physical side. I'll tell you, one time when we lived in Florida, and my kids were little when I lived in Florida, there is a picture that's taken of me right outside of my front door, and I'm just kind of staring off into the distance. And I kept that picture all these years later because that's the moment I realized I had lost myself. You could see in my eyes and you can see in my face that I had completely lost myself. And I was in an abusive marriage at the time. So, that was kind of that reminder that I deserve better than that kind of life. But, those shifts, they can be anything. It can be something small. Like, I mean, to me, looking at a picture is a small thing that happens, but it wakes you up and it makes you realize I've got to do something different, you know? Or the conversation you had with your boss who helped you become a better therapist. I mean, either one of those, but it clicks something in your brain. And maybe so you talked about the reticular activated system. Is it that part of the brain, or is there a different part that kind of gets activated and that gets on fire that gives you passion and the drive and the determination to make your life different?
That was definitely a big shift, because as you start to process those emotions and you start to say, I deserve better, that filter system starts to click on and says, okay, well, let's look for reasons why you deserve to be better. Right? It's going to filter in that belief system for you. It's going to say, okay, now, Cory, this is why you need to get in a better shape. Boom, boom, boom. And it starts to pull that information into you. It's a loop system, because the more that you start to think about reasons why you need to change and why you want to have better, you generate a thought, but that thought will also bring on an emotion. And so those emotions, they're basically what get us to do things. People want to say, for as much as we're logical people, we're more emotionally inclined to act than we are to logically react. So when we generate a thought and we get that thought going, an emotion's going to swell up, which is going to trigger another thought, and then that's going to trigger an emotion, and it's just this loop system. Now, the longer that loop system starts to go on, you start to have neuroplasticity start to take place, where those neurons inside your brain start to form those synapses and start to say, generate that pulse, that focus of where you're going to go. And so with that, the increased frequency of firing of those neurons, it starts to change our beliefs. We start to change the way we see things, the way we react to things, and it basically changes the environment that we're in, which leads to another phenomenon that we talk about. It's called epigenetics, where how it's the genes inside our body are expressed through the environment that they're in versus the actual coding of the DNA. It says, well, if you're in a stressful environment, you can have some of those genetics kind of shut down, where it starts to produce diseases, these different types of adverse reactions to the body. But if you put yourself in a positive environment and start to have like a more focused outlook on where you want to go, these genes can start to be upregulated, start to produce more positive, beneficial healing aspects for yourself. And so it gets right down to like the core essence of who we are through our genes, through our brain, through our neurons. It's a whole process that the body responds to what you want it to do.
That's insane.
Yeah. It's so when people say, well, it's my shoulder that's bothering me, we're going to say, well, let's address the root cause about what's going on. Let's start to challenge your thoughts about what's happening, start thinking about it better. And when they start to feel like, hey, my shoulder can get better, they're going to find themselves making better decisions about just getting up on time, exercising, anything else, and their environment, their whole place of being changes, and they start to not only, hey, my shoulder's feeling better, but I'm sleeping better at night, I can see better, I can walk better. It's a whole list of things that they never even realized that was happening can start to improve with just the change.
That makes me wonder. I've heard people say quite a bit that you can, like it, you can tell yourself you're healthy, you're not, not going to get sick. I'm not saying the negative side, but when they're saying these affirmations to themselves, I kind of see it, just going to be blunt level honest with you, that's kind of wooey to me. But what I'm hearing you say is that some of that might have some benefit based on the science of it.
Absolutely. Just saying it and saying, hey, I want to be healthy, or I want this. We have to, again, it has to get down to the crystal clear what's the true meaning behind it. Because if I'm saying, well, I want to be healthy because I don't want to be overweight. Well, what we're actually saying is I don't want to be overweight. That's the truth. That's the story that we're telling us.
So I think what it is the wooey part is when people think they can think their way into things happening without actually taking action to make things happen. So they think they can just will it to come to them. But it sounds to me like you get your thoughts right. you activate that reticular activating system. And then you talked about the neuroplasticity involved in it. So it starts with those thoughts, and then your brain starts scanning for ways and things that you can do to make it happen. So it's not like I can just sit here and say, hey, I'm going to, be a millionaire in 5 years or whatever somebody might say. But if they truly did have that mindset and that's something that they wanted, then maybe their brain would start looking for ways for them to achieve that. And maybe that's different than just saying, I want this.
Yeah.
I hear people, I see videos of it. I hear people doing it all the time where they either create these vision boards or they say these affirmations or they try to bring things into their existence. But I think it's more than just thinking it. What I'm hearing you say and explaining the science is that once you say this to yourself, then your brain starts looking for ways to make it happen. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, if you just sit down there and say, like, if I was to sit in this chair and say, then 5 years, I want to be a millionaire, but I'm not going to move to this chair, and then somehow it's going to come to me in 5 years, I'm going to be disappointed, right? It's because you're not really grasping the concept of it. It's about changing the narrative, which starts to change the way you perceive things and the way you act.
Yes. And that's the point that I think is the most important to make, is that it changes the things that you do, right? And so the things that you do to have, again, going back to that victim versus personal
Uh-huh.
accountability mindset, we take personal responsibility for our actions. And when we want things differently, we shift our mindset and then start doing things differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you start to think differently, you start to believe differently because it's all built upon, it's like compounding interest. You have a thought. The more you keep thinking that, you form a belief, because a belief is nothing more than a thought that you keep thinking. Now, the beliefs are what going to drive your habits. And that's where you take the physical, like the thinking and everything, is where you take your belief and change that into a habit, because then the habit produces the action, which is the action that produces the result. And there's the chain of difference. For anything you want to achieve in your life, there's got to be adequate movement involved with it. But the way that you're perceiving your actions and the outcome of that will greatly determine what decisions you make, the outcome of that, and how you proceed to move forward.
So let me ask you, have you ever read the book Compound Effect by Darren Hardy?
I have not.
Okay. So the things that you said in that last piece about how they compound upon each other, his book, people read Atomic Habits. And that book is great, but Compound Effect was one of the first books that I read that's put a big, huge spotlight and like a flashing neon sign in front of me and had me realize how important those little bitty things that we do every single day, how important they are and how they compound upon each other. And it seems so elementary now, but back then it was like this huge revelation for me. So if somebody is listening right now and they are feeling stuck with where they are, what's like one little thing that they can do today to get out of that rut of being stuck and move forward?
That honestly, the best thing that they can do today is seek clarity off of what they want to have in their life. Because when you feel stuck and you have lost vision, you've have lost direction, you feel everything's the same, and they ask that to patients, to clients, says, "Well, what is it that you want in your life?" And they give you that deer caught in the headlight look, and they're like, "What do you mean?" And it's like, "Well, what is it that you want?" If you can't articulate what you want and what's meaningful and purposeful for you, then there's step number one. What is it that I want to do today? And then don't only think about it, write it down. When you take that and you put that action of putting it down to pencil and writing it out, there's a shift that also happens inside you, that starts that process of you believing that this is a possibility. And so,
I love that we've had this conversation today, Dr. Cory, because I've heard some of the tips and tricks, some of these practices before, but I think you did a really good job of explaining why these things work, these foundational or fundamental things that we here to do to make our life better. You helped explain why they work, not just the fact that they do work, but you helped me even connect some dots between, okay, I know these things work, but I don't know why they work. And you just did a really good job. So thank you for that. I have a fun little thing for us right quick. On The Shift podcast, we have a segment that we call the Insight Wild Card. All right. So it's one question, one moment. I have a list of 10 questions on standby, and I'm going to ask you to pick a number between 1 and 10. And whichever number you pick, that's going to be the final question I'm going to ask you today.
Okay, well, I'll go with number 6.
Number 6. Let's find number 6. All right, here we go. Ready? Okay, so you picked question number 6, and that question is, when were you the most afraid to take a step? And what happened when you decided to take that step in spite of the fear?
That's a really good question. The time that I was most afraid to take that step was actually when I realized that that relationship that I was in was not serving myself or my children. Actually, it was leading us away from where we wanted to be, from where we as a family knew that we needed to be. And for years, I had felt like it was my obligation to just be tough, push through the challenges, the obstacles, and eventually something was going to change. And once I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how I begged and pleaded and tried to change myself, things weren't going to get better. I decided to make that change, to give my kids and myself a different life. And looking back on it, it was a tough decision because not everybody, and especially in my immediate family and others around me, they didn't understand what was happening to the extent they saw a little bit. Um, but once we decided to make that change, I would say peace happened. It was an emotional experience. I talk about it with my kids often. They thank me for having the courage to do what was needed to get us to a better spot. And, I think looking back on it, everybody who was involved in that relationship is much better off now. Like all of us, everybody who was involved. But that was most certainly the most scariest point in my life when I knew that I needed to make this change. It was going to be tough. It was going to be long, but it was very much needed.
I understand when you say how frightening or how scary that step is to make. I've had to make some decisions similar to that. And you're absolutely right. Once you make that decision, it not only helps you and in your case, your children, but it helps everyone else as well, from your wife, ex-wife, to family members and friends. And they might not understand, and they never will if they didn't walk it. They never will understand the extent of what you went through. But even if they did and they disagreed, we're still the ones who have to make the hard choices for our lives, right? Whether they agree, whether they don't, whether they approve, whether they don't, we have to make those decisions for ourselves. So kudos to you for taking that hard step. I know firsthand just how hard it is to take, but I also know firsthand how important it is to take that for your children. So again, kudos. Dr. Cory, how can people get in touch with you and learn more about this amazing work you're doing, this holistic mind, body, and spirit work that you're doing?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me or kind of follow what I'm doing is follow me on Twitter, which is or X, what's it's called now, and my handle is at Dr. Cory C. Find me on there. That's where I post most of my content. I do have a newsletter that you can subscribe to that, and that's found through my Twitter page. But also, I'm starting to put more video content out there. So I have a YouTube channel that they can find Dr. Cory Christensen on YouTube. And so those are the best ways to get in touch with me.
Do you still take patients at your clinic?
I still treat patients every day, and people who want to learn, coach with me or go through this process with me, all they can do is send me their information, get in touch with me on my Gmail is dr.corychristensen@gmail.com, and we can start the process of helping you have that mindset change, that shift that you want to have happen in your own life.
And that's DR period, right, for doctor?
Dr. Cory Christensen at Gmail.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. This work you're doing is amazing. I'm sure you've changed and made for the better a lot of people's lives, and just really looking forward to seeing what you do moving forward. So thank you for your time today, Dr. Cory.
Thank you, Amy, for having me. It's been a pleasure.